Something went very wrong over the last 3.5 years, or maybe it's been wrong a lot longer than that, and I just didn't entirely notice it. You know, there was a day at some point, oh, I remember what it was. It was February 27th, 2020, when the New York Times decided to let its pages be turned over to the CIA or something, or to Pfizer. Same thing. Do you know that if somebody had said that to me 4 years ago, I would have thought you were an insane person. I don't believe that stuff. Something went very wrong. Anyway, we've got Debbie, the intrepid Debbie Lerman, who deserves one of those Pulitzer Prizes if that had any credibility left. We need our own Brownstone Prize, right? Gabrielle Bauer, author of Blindside is 2020, and you've got a little presentation we might start with. Adam Creighton is one of the world's greatest economics reporters, and he's been all over this from the very beginning. How you got your articles in the press, I don't understand, but you were one of the free truth tellers on the planet Earth from the very early days. And James Bovard, whose collected works could be described as the corruption of everything and everyone forever. Okay. Anyway, it's a very exciting panel, and I'm just looking at the time and realizing that because we're starting a little late, we have a good excuse to go a little bit longer, which I think we should, actually. So, is Stefan Kinsella here? He sent me no, he's not. Okay. It means I can make mistakes and he won't call me out on it. That's good, because that's all he does. All right, why don't we start with you, Gabrielle? Is it okay? Would you like to stand, or are you like that sort of that repose, that sort of luxuriating look?
I guess I can just stay here. I wanted to just do something different. I wanted to to share something with everybody. I've been a journalist and medical writer for the past 29 years, and over the past 3 years, I've written 30 plus COVID essays, some of them for Brownstone, and throughout this process, I compiled a 5-page list of freedom-friendly publications and other news outlets, because I found, through trial and error, that some publications were open to what I had to say and others were not. So I have this list, and I would love to share it with you and with anyone who might be interested in writing your own stuff and submitting it as op-eds or essays or Substack or whatever. So, since it wasn't really realistic to make 5-page copies for everyone in attendance, what I'm proposing is anyone who is interested in obtaining this list, just email me. My email address is available on the Brownstone website under authors, or you can just look up my name. My own website has my email address, and I'll be happy to send it.
What do you think about writing that up for Brownstone? Have you considered that? Just writing an article about this?
Very interesting idea.
Yeah.
I would do that too.
This is why I'm a great editor. I just make everybody write everything they say.
Okay, I'll add it to my to-do list.
Okay. It has been frustrating, hasn't it? Almost like we have to just like we have to rebuild everything. Since everything fell apart, we have to rebuild journalism too, it seems to me. Adam, is it okay if I start with you? I mean, I would like to know maybe some memoirs because at the time you're living in Washington D.C., but at the time you were in Sydney, right? I don't think your mic's working.
It's not on.
Yeah.
Can they turn it on?
My friends in the back, can we get Adam's shout?
I can just speak loudly.
No, nice people in the back. Can we?
Anyway, so yes, so I was in Sydney, and I was the mild-mannered economics journalist at the Australian.
Yeah, nobody can hear you. So let's.
It's off. Yes, but how do I turn it off?
I don't know how to work these things. It says it's on.
Testing. On. No.
Well, maybe while we, oh, here comes our technician now. Ah.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, the old-fashioned way.
Okay, so take that. Okay. Yes, you're asking me kind of where I was at the time. So this is early 2020. I was in Sydney. I was the economics editor of The Australian, which is a national broadsheet newspaper. I guess you'd say the paper of record in Australia. So I wrote mainly about economics, and then of course the virus that came upon us, and I just followed all the data, and I realised, I think fairly soon, that it was nowhere near as lethal or dangerous as the media were making out. And so I started writing about that. My first article was the 14th of April 2020, and it was entitled, "We Might Be Overreacting to an Unremarkable Virus."
What was the date?
14th of April 2020.
14th, you need to hold the
Sorry,
microphone.
14th of April 2020. And that went crazy, that article, absolutely crazy. It was almost like I'd endorsed the Third Reich or something. And yet it was what I thought a fairly reasonable view that I put forward, which I think has turned out to be completely vindicated by the facts. And so throughout 2020, I wrote about the COVID response and the madness of it pretty much every week. And I'm grateful to The Australian, to News Corp for publishing me every week. They did. And there was a very receptive audience, at least amongst a large minority of people, I would say, who agreed that it was insane. But there was very little support for me in the rest of the mainstream media, I would say, and there continues to be very little, even though I think I've been vindicated.
Well, since you were sort of a big shot at a big shot newspaper, can you tell me something? Because in the middle of February, there were quite a lot of articles actually in the mainstream press that were saying we're overreacting to the coronavirus, right? I mean, this was Psychology Today had an article like that. Slate had an article like that. I mean, Fauci had an article in New England Journal of Medicine saying more or less that about a week after that. So this was not entirely an unconventional line at the time. And then suddenly everything changed where everybody was on the same page and whipping up a kind of an out-of-control frenzy, and I'm going to estimate that that was certainly in place by March 1st, for sure. 3 days after the New York Times started this. So, do you have any insight on how this might have happened?
The group thing?
Yeah.
Well, I think because most journalists now come from the same socioeconomic background, at least in the elite publications, and their instinct is to agree with the bureaucracy. They're the same people, they're the same socioeconomic class. And I think that explains so much of the cheering for whatever the bureaucracy was recommending. I think there's a lot less, at least in my experience. I mean, I was never told not to write this or you write that.
You say you were never told?
Never. But I just had a different view. That's a deep question as to why. I spent most of my career prior to the COVID pandemic attacking regulatory capture in the finance sector. And so I guess that's, it's kind of an outlier view too. So I was very anti-bank, I suppose. And there's so much propaganda around the finance system that most journalists swallow, but I did not. And so then this other issue came along and I just treated it in the same way. But I think groupthink amongst journalists is extreme, I think. And it's very hard to fix.
And isn't there also a careerism here too? But it always worries me in the U.S. because whatever the New York Times says, everybody wants to be a New York Times reporter. That's sort of the career goal. It's like getting tenure, at a university or something. And so whatever the New York Times says, everybody, all the way down to local crime reporters, are echoing that same position.
Well, and that's, it's partly a function of economics. I mean, the economic model of these big prestigious publications is to pay low salaries, right? Because they're partly paying the reporters in prestige. Whereas in most jobs, you don't get paid in prestige. You just get the financial compensation. That's the vast bulk of jobs in the world. But in the media, there is this prestige element. There's a fame element, and that means that media companies can pay substantially less. And of course, when you do that, you generally get children from upper classes who are applying for the job.
So true.
And so that goes to my point earlier. earlier, is you have, at the New York Times in particular, you have the children of the upper class working there.
Yeah.
Because they don't need huge salaries because they have family money. And so that gets this extraordinary groupthink. I mean, it's actually less that way in Australia than it is in the US and the UK, and that partly explains me. And I think that's a good thing. But in the US, certainly, it's a very different model.
You understand what he's saying, right? I mean, this is weird. I've only recently found this out, but like this finance jobs at Christie's paid far lower than they will at your local Edward Jones office, and this is partially because, the prestige element. So it's very strange, and it means that only the elites can get the elite jobs because they're all being subsidized by their parents, or they have money in the bank or whatever.
One more point too, I think that's worth making is that, of course, journalists don't have tenure, so they can be sacked very easily, and so that could that could, and I'm sure it does, create a lot of hesitation amongst journalists who might be thinking about writing a particular point of view, but they just think it's not worth it.
Right. So the jobs are not so fungible. Like, for example, if you get sacked if you're working at Great Clips as a haircut or whatever, and you don't like the boss, you quit, you can go down a mile down the road and get another job exactly the same, right? But in journalism, if you lose your position at the Atlanta Journal of whatever, then you get bumped down to the Montgomery, whatever. Then you're a loser, and your chance for going to the Dallas Morning News is shot, right? So these positions are a little bit.
And it's also your journalists now are typically educated with 1 or 2, sometimes 3 degrees, which is totally different to 40, 50 years ago when they typically hadn't been to university at all. And they were a lot more skeptical of authority. Whereas now, as I said, they're from the same social milieu, Harvard and Yale in this country and so forth. I mean, if you look at the CVs of people at the New York Times, it will be very similar to the CVs of young academics, right? They're just as educated, but that certainly doesn't mean they get things right, as we've seen.
Yeah.
On paper, they're very educated.
Yeah, it really does speak to this profound issue of the importance of class in what's happened over the last 3.5 years. It was entirely a ruling class, upper class racket, as far as I can tell. Debbie, you were going to talk.
I just wanted to add to what you were saying, Adam. Robert, in his book, Robert Malone's book, talked about journalism isn't really about investigating anymore. And at the top journalism schools, they teach something called advocacy journalism. Now, to me, that's an oxymoron. You can't have advocacy in journalism, right? It's either advocacy or journalism. But if people think that what they're doing in journalism is they're supposed to advocate for a certain position, then they're not going to be doing journalism anymore. And that's pretty much what's happened. So it's the prestige, and it's everybody coming from the same class and having the same opinion. And also one of their opinions is that journalism is supposed to advocate for the positions that their class advocates for.
Yeah. All of which reminds me of the New York Times for 2 years we're running articles about like type in your zip code and we'll tell you what to do. And so you type in your zip code and they go, coronavirus is spreading in your community. You need to not travel. You should stay home and have your groceries delivered.
Right.
By people who don't read the New York Times. Who are these people delivering these groceries? They don't care. Now, since you are a graduate of Harvard, and
yeah, that was funny. I didn't wear my Hokie T-shirt today, and this being Texas, Hokie refers to Virginia Tech.
okay.
I'm also not I'm a dropout, not a graduate.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes 2 of us. I also dropped out of Harvard.
Oh, did you? Okay. You and Bill Gates. Your average net worth between you and Bill Gates is really high.
But Jim, always reliable, Jim. You never bought this narrative from the very beginning, but somehow you kept, most of your publication outlet has been the New York Post, right?
Lately, yeah, I did a number of COVID bashes for USA Today.
Yeah.
They had a really good editor there who's no longer there. Yeah, I mean, there were places that were open to ideas that were very critical of the pandemic status quo. One thing that got me focusing on a lot more was when you contacted me in May of 2020 and asked me, hey, would you like to write something for us? And so I sent back, I said, well, how much do you pay? And we eventually came to terms, and I did a lot of stories. What?
Yeah, I remember. Yeah.
What was I supposed to say?
No, I get it. Yeah.
I'm an independent contractor, you know how I survive. But, you know, there are places and there have been editorial boards that did a decent job during the pandemic, but they were overwhelmed. It's interesting, there was a piece in the Washington Post in October 2021, I think. It was by an MIT professor, and he was focusing on the controversy about whether or not the U.S. had funded gain-of-function research at Wuhan lab. And he made the point brilliantly that it was insane to do any financing of what could be a mass weapon that could kill millions of people. It didn't matter this specific lab or this specific grant. The entire idea of the U.S. government, AID, NIH, whoever, funding gain-of-function research that could be a mass deadly weapon was crazy. And that was in the Washington Post. It made a lot more sense than what the vast majority of the news coverage was, but every now and then there was stuff that would pop up. The Post had a couple articles, op-eds by the FDA vaccine chiefs who resigned in protest after the Biden White House sought to force him to give full approval to the Pfizer vax. And so there were folks that spoke out and laid out that, okay, these are the crimes, these are the cover-ups, these are the follies, but they didn't get traction. So,
Debbie, how does it turn out to be the case that so many of the big breakthroughs and understanding have come from the Brownstone crowd? Like, this is not the way the world should work.
I'm horrified. I don't want to be the one doing this.
Yeah.
And I only started doing it because nobody else was.
Yeah.
And because you gave me and us a platform for it.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to even start approaching what we do about journalism now with the people who are being trained in all these schools in advocacy journalism, and I don't even know what else, but I don't see, there are so many stories out there. COVID is the richest mine for any journalist, serious, real journalist of the past. For stories, there could have been like hundreds of Pulitzer winners who were out there investigating all the stuff that went on during COVID. There's still a million things to investigate, and there isn't anybody doing the investigation except for us,
I know.
You know, and
it's crazy.
People. And so it gave me a whole new life and a whole new identity and a whole new purpose to be doing that investigation. But I don't want to be doing it alone. And I don't want us to be the only ones who are doing it.
I'll tell you a funny story because I'm getting more and more of a sense of collegiality and privacy here, even though we're being live streamed on Epoch Television. But it was funny because Brownstone has very limited resources, and I had already given out all of our fellowships, you know? And I was like, we're poor. So Debbie calls up, she said, I would like to be a fellow. And I said, but Debbie, that won't be possible. And she said, you don't understand. I am spending all my time doing research and writing for you. My husband is furious. If you would make me a fellow, I would have an excuse. I said, all right, you're a fellow.
It's true. I just wanted the title. Just the legitimacy. Because the journalists who call themselves journalists, I don't know what they're doing. But they're not investigating, and they're not, I don't know, it's so exciting when the amount of documents that are out there and the amount of things that we still need to get our hands on through FOIAs and information requests, not just from the U.S. government, but from many, many governments around the world who I think we're all working in concert. there's just so much material out there that if you were a journalist, it would be a feast, a wealth of material to investigate. And I don't understand where the people are.
So I think something that would be helpful, Brownstone might want to do this, would be do a weekly roundup of the really good articles that are coming out on COVID. Sometimes in small papers, sometimes in foreign sources. There is good stuff being written and published or put online. It's not getting nearly as much traction as it should, but there are journalists out there who are nailing some of the lies, some of the abuses, and some of the collateral damage. I mean, it's not a tidal wave, it's certainly not predominant, but it's out there, and if folks could just have a simple place where, okay, you know, for this week, let's go here, and you might have something from a small paper in South Texas, you might have something from, you know, the Washington Times, and some of it might be credible, some of it might not be, but, you know, to have a good solid roundup. So maybe somebody's already doing that. Is anybody already doing that?
Daily Skeptic does some of that, I think.
A Daily Skeptic. Okay. All right. I was wrong.
But you're right. We need something like that. I mean, as you've gathered, our staff is tiny. You know, we have four staffers, and that's up from 3 from 2 weeks ago. There's so much more to do. Adam, you were about to say something.
Oh, just to sound an optimistic note on the media, I think they will return to these stories eventually. I just think there's a reluctance for a year or two perhaps, but so many of the editors and senior journalists themselves champion these policies that they don't really want to go near the vaccine injuries, say, or the disasters of lockdown because they supported them. But inevitably through attrition, there'll be new editors arrive, there'll be younger journalists arrive who were not part of the decision making. And I think the economic incentive to pursue the story will triumph in the long term.
Right.
And you know, we can say the same thing in my view about COVID inquiries, you know, which are being held in some countries right now. I don't think they're going to be fair inquiries because the people who made the decisions are still in power. And quite often the people who are overseeing the inquiries supported those decisions, at least in private, and so you're not going to get an honest answer. So I think it's best to have these inquiries, these sort of reckonings in 4 or 5 years' time.
Yeah, it's so funny how you say it with such confidence. Well, they were wrong, so they never want to admit it. But I did not know that is the way it would work. When I saw everybody was wrong from March on, I thought, well, everybody's wrong, so everybody will be very shortly admitting it. Oh, this is you, Father. This is a man who hears confessions all day, you know? He's over there going, oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, I didn't realize that people would be so invested in their fake narratives. Yeah. Gabrielle, go ahead.
Well, Jeffrey, I think you alluded to before March, there were people who were questioning this, and then something happened. I think the same tribalism that took hold of all sectors took hold of the journalistic sector.
Yeah.
And so it just became a question of allegiance to tribe. And I'm finding that even now in trying to promote my book, right-leaning or libertarian news outlets are so much more receptive than left-leaning ones, predictably, and very disappointingly, because one of my purposes in writing the book was to talk to both sides of the issue. And it's, you know, I've had the most amazing and interesting podcasts with many people in this room and people on the right libertarian side, but how to break through to the other side is something that I just rack my head.
And this left-right issue is a peculiar one for me because I don't care left, right, doesn't matter to me, but I will tell you that overwhelmingly our core writers consider themselves from the left, historically speaking. I don't know why that is, you know, and nor do I understand, you know, how it comes to be that these days, you know, our audience tends to be from the right. I'm not sure I understand any of this anymore.
Well, I think that was caused by Donald Trump, sadly. It wasn't his intention, but I think when he hinted throughout 2020 that he didn't support lockdowns, although he was involved in the original rollout, I think the left just recoiled in horror, and then they've associated anyone who opposed lockdowns with Donald Trump, which of course is logically absurd, but that's the reality, because I mean, I always saw lockdowns as far more damaging to the poor, both in rich countries and throughout the world.
Right.
And so you'd think it was naturally a left-wing response to oppose them. And of course, all of the wealth inequality that they created as well. I mean, an extraordinary increase in wealth inequality, which you'd think the left would hate, and yet they seem to be quite okay with it. It's very strange.
Now, you know the old meme of the person who stands in place, who's on the left, but then the Overton window moves and moves. So like in 2005, they were on the left, and then in 2021, they're suddenly far right.
Yeah.
Political opinions haven't changed, but the zeitgeist has changed.
Debbie?
I'm going to be the pessimist in the room because I'm also going to introduce the whole subject of censorship because we have our group now. And I do think that that's probably the most important issue that we have to deal with as journalists and as truth seekers. And some of the explanations for everything that we've been talking about have to do with the censorship industrial complex and the propaganda industrial complex, all of which started before COVID, all of which were controlled by what was considered the left. In censoring the right. I'm from what I considered a liberal leftist democratic background. Totally never voted for a Republican, you know, didn't like Trump, all of that stuff. It's all gone now. But I know, having come from that world, that the virtue and belief in doing the right thing that the people have on that side in terms of we're doing the right thing by excluding these views and excluding these inconvenient facts that are going against our narrative is very strong. There's a very strong belief that that's a good thing. And so in addition to training our young journalists to be advocates for whatever, we're also training them to be censors. And so a whole generation of really smart and motivated people who want to do good in the world are being told that the way to do good is to make sure that there's only one narrative. And I think that's an explanation for a lot of the stuff that's been going on.
Yeah, and real censorship from the very beginning of the lockdowns. I mean, Elon Musk recently gave an interview to, what's his name, Joe Rogan, where he said that Twitter 1.0 might as well have been a government thing. And you remember those days, right? I mean, we felt very much alone. I felt like I was a lone guy out there. And it turns out, maybe we were somewhat a minority opinion, but the main problem is we weren't allowed to find each other, you know?
Still aren't. And actually, again, to bring a note of pessimism or realism, Google's algorithms, I am positive, are suppressing Brownstone severely.
Yeah.
Everybody here who's written anything, any books, any articles, the Google algorithm is not promoting them and is suppressing them. And so not just Twitter, it's not just the social media companies. Google is the biggest information broker in the world. I mean, that's it. That's where the information comes from. And if their algorithms aren't neutral, then I don't know what to do about it. It's really, really hard. And I feel like Brownstone, it's miraculous that we've become as known and successful, but we would be hundreds of times more known and more popular if there wasn't that suppression going on.
Sure. Sure. We've dealt a lot with these fact checkers, which we now know are mostly, intelligence agency hirelings, and they write us all the time and come at us, hammer and talk. I just delete these. I just delete them. I mean, I'm not going to answer these. I had one conversation with one of these idiots one time because I looked up his background and I found out who he was, and it doesn't matter. But just deleting these emails, they write us all the time, harassing us about this point or that point, and basically it's a mild threat. But I just delete them, and then they come up with their stupid story, and nobody seems to care. I mean, it's all dumb. I've learned this. Like the more afraid you are of them, the more effective they are. Like you give them oxygen when you panic about them.
Yeah.
You amplify their attacks. So, oh yeah, this happened the other day. Rolling Stone. Do you know this magazine, Rolling Stone? Yeah. Anyway, they had a big attack on. Did you even know this? They attacked. No, you didn't know because I didn't tell anybody. But they had a big attack. Oh, Brownstone's bad. Funded by a billionaire child labor advocate Jeffrey Tucker. Okay. How am I going to respond to that? It was a dumb attack, and I looked at it. I sent it to Louisman, our web guy, and it was linking to us throughout the whole thing. Well, we have analytics too, right? We can see who's coming from that story to go, who are these bad people? And I said, Lou, let's keep track of all the links coming in from Rolling Stone with this big smashing attack on us. A week later, he reported, nobody's reading this crap. I mean, that's the bottom line. It's just not, they're not reading it. So it's not having, isn't that interesting? Rolling Stone, you think Rolling Stone tried to take us down. I didn't write a big article. Oh no, scared of Rolling Stone. I didn't write anything about it. I didn't tell anyone about it. I don't even think you know about it.
I did.
Oh, you did know about it.
It's Walker Bragman. I know everything about Walker.
Oh, Walter Bragman, yeah. Yeah. So I didn't mean to take over. James, go ahead.
About what?
Oh, anything.
Okay. It's interesting to see how the controversies are playing out. I guess I'm not as jaded on fact checkers. I've dealt with them often. Well, if I'm writing for some papers, I mean, it's like could be a Chinese water torture. But they've, sometimes they've been very helpful in finding errors that I didn't realize were in pieces. Post-publication, some of the challenges have been total BS. Every now and then, I get a contact from someone, and he or she is raising a question, and I send my sources, and sometimes they've said, yeah, okay, fine. It said, okay, it holds up. So.
Yeah. Jim, I've never asked you this, but how do you maintain such a lightness of being?
Lightness of being.
You do. I mean, you were writing, for your whole career has been splitting throats and debunking lies and everything, and yet you're all joyful and charming.
I enjoy throwing rocks, especially at the government. But so since you mentioned, I modified my attire for this because I was at the dinner last night and I was wearing a coat and tie, and there was this very nice lady sitting at the same table, and she said that I looked like a lawyer, and I was traumatized. I said, okay, no more ties, no more coat. I mean, if people are going to be saying look like a lawyer, it's like, where did I go wrong? Well,
I do appreciate the effort anyway, Jeff. That's good. You can line up for questions. I don't know what we're going to do about this microphone problem, though. Do we have an extra spare microphone somewhere? Yeah, Father, go ahead. Let's pretend as if it's, pretend as if there's a microphone.
I'd like to introduce another consideration, is that we've self-selected our journalists to be almost exclusively of the personality trait of agreeableness.
I don't see that. No, I mean, I know a lot of journalists, and that's
conformity and politeness, at least within their circle. There are no H.L. Menckens anymore.
I think that's true. I think it's a very true observation. People don't like to rock the boat in journalism.
I don't care who I'm going to tick off. I'm going to break the story.
That's right.
I'm just competitive. That trait seems to be absent.
I think it's still there to a degree. I think there's certainly no shortage of abrasive assholes in journalism. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, some people even said that about me. So, I mean, there's a herd instinct. I mean, it's the point that y'all were making earlier about a lot of them went to the same college, the same graduate school. I think a lot of the fundamental trouble with the coverage for the COVID pandemic was the same as what mistakes they've made, at least going back to 9/11, a blind trust in authority and government. They are so deferential to government officials. It's interesting, if you look back at journalism in the 1940s or 50s, a lot of them started out being police reporters. And one thing you learn being a police reporter is that the police lie all the time. And folks take the same lesson to look at the local politicians, and then to look at the members of Congress, and the president, and the Pentagon. And so journalists have lost this instinct about government being a perpetual, pervasive liar. There are some honest officials and some honest agencies, but they have lost that gut instinct about, like, okay, the government says this, you know, where's my BS radar? So.
And also they might be government agents.
Yeah, or the flip side is they're hoping to get a job with the government after they finish with the New York Times or Washington Post.
Yeah.
So
New York Times growing up.
Operation Mockingbird was exposed in the mid-1970s,
Yes.
where the CIA had all these top journalists on their payroll. So I was shocked.
Still waiting for my check, though, I must say.
Paula.
Hi. I think a critical thing here with COVID is that if you look at who has been adversely impacted by it, the poor, the single parents, and there's no lobbyists, there are very few lobbyists who lobby for the poor. And when you talk about the journalists who've gone to Harvard, Ivy League schools, where's their reference point for want, for need? You know, it's like the laptop class, you know, they weren't really affected.
Yeah.
But who's speaking up so in reference to journalists with their privilege? Where is their connection to not having money to feed your family or fix your car or pay your rent? So I think there's a skewed perspective, once again, of the plight of the people who were really affected by COVID.
It's interesting, there was a focus by places like the Washington Post and other places. They were very much, they claimed to be concerned about that issue, but the answer was to give more food stamps.
Right.
And,
yes.
and just as long as you had more government handouts, then it didn't matter how many livelihoods were destroyed, or how many people were locked in their houses, or how many people committed suicide because of depression, because the government had this handout and that handout and this handout. So, you know, it was the politicians absolved themselves with handouts.
Yeah.
So
It wasn't just, too, that the laptop class were not harmed. I mean, I think the depressing reality is many of these people actually benefited from these policies because their costs went down, whether it was, you know, traveling to work, they had to work less. Certainly in the case of teachers and academics who were often the most stridently in favour of these policies.
Yeah.
It was, you know, it was just coincidence, of course, that they happened to actually benefit the most.
Do you remember that video when Fauci went to Anacostia? To DC, and he was trying to, he was selling his vaccine, and this guy said, "I'm not going to take this crazy shot you invented in 10 minutes, but you know, why should I? And Fauci said, "We've been working on it for 30 years." And the guy said, "Yeah, but the fact that you're having to arrive at my front door makes me very suspicious, you know."
Well, it wasn't just the front door. It was a black guy on his doorstep in Anacostia, the poorest area of D.C., but he was so much better than the Washington journalist.
Oh, yeah, that's for sure.
He just pushed back. He had questions. Well, it's only approved in 7 months, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, if it's so good, how come you're offering to pay me for it?
Yeah.
What about this damn TV camera crew there? But it's funny that PBS was so pro-Fauci that PBS thought showing that would help Fauci's
and then Fauci got in his car and put on hand sanitizer. Wow. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Carl Eric Scott. I write a Substack, Postmodern Conservative, and you know we're having a good time, but it's kind of a dark period, and I want you guys to speak to a sort of dark hypothesis that's been haunting me. This whole COVID vax disaster has implicated like 80, 95, maybe even higher of elites in journalism, medicine across the board. these people have incredible incentive to keep covering up things. No one is talking on any official channel about the big radioactive one, the vax harms, the deaths.
Yeah.
And I'm worried these people are just like, gosh, we've gotten away for it for a year and a half. Why not continue? What's in it for me, possibly, to let it come out?
Yep.
I agree.
We have, I think we have a science panel committee. Yeah, Godek, Thacker, Damasi, Malone a little later, and we're surely going to address some of those. Oh, and I see Toby Rogers. The very dangerous Toby Rogers is coming up a little later. So.
Yeah, those are good points. It's, but this is how it usually works when the government screws things up completely. Most of the culprits don't have any culpability or liability, and the outrages get buried. And it's interesting if you look at the U.S. government torture scandal that started under George W. Bush. Completely swept under the rug. Senator Feinstein was one of the few people who pushed back, but she died, and almost nobody recalled her finest hour of pushing back against the CIA torture cover-up. So it's sad.
Yeah, but she completely neglected the most recent CIA torture cover-up.
You mean as far as the COVID?
Yeah.
No. She was, I was opposed to her on almost everything, but she showed courage on that issue. Mm-hmm. She also, I think, might have said 2 or 3 good sentences on the surveillance scandal, but not much. So.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's a simple explanation that people are essentially afraid of losing their livelihoods and their jobs. It just keeps going. And I had to consider that too. I'm a freelance writer, but I have a lot of clients. But I'm in the fortunate position that I don't have young children anymore, so I was able to take these risks.
Yeah.
But I have certainly thought about what if I had a young family to feed?
Yeah.
What would I do?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't have the answer.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's stopping.
Sadly, I don't think Substack solves this problem either, because there's people that are making a living from Substack, and I thought that was the greatest thing ever. But the problem is that if you say things that your audience doesn't like, you're going to face it's actually an issue. So I don't know what the answer is. Dr. Malone, what's good?
So I'm Robert Malone. I'm glad that I heard the word drop Mockingbird. Jill and I are in the middle of finalizing our book on Psy-War and sovereignty. And in that context, I've spent a lot of time now reading the Church Commission reports and Carl Bernstein's breakthrough expose in Rolling Stone that carried that narrative quite a bit farther forward, but still did not really get to the underlying depth and extent of the tendrils that extend from CIA and the mighty Wurlitzer, which go back to 1942 and OSS, carry through to the present. And what the Church Commission pulled their punches on was not only the integration of CIA in journalism, because journalists are such great cover, particularly international journalists, but also their deep involvement in academia, which I can testify from personal experience is a fact, okay? My point is that the group is, I think, making, you're groping the elephant, and you're making the same assertion that Brett Weinstein made on that infamous podcast with Steve Kirshner, which is that this is an emergent property of a complex system. I disagree. Here's the fundamental observation. This PSYOP propaganda campaign occurred simultaneously throughout the Western world in a harmonized fashion using exactly the same language and strategies. That's right. The strategies that have been deployed are identical to those that are described in the Church report for COINTELPRO, which was the FBI's campaign to disrupt and delegitimize the civil rights protest and the anti-Vietnam War protest in the 1960s. They are the same exact tactics. And they are the same exact tactics that were used by Mockingbird. This long-standing program that's been central to the CIA throughout its entire existence. Furthermore, there's this assertion that the CIA is in some way prevented from engaging in domestic surveillance and propaganda. That is absolutely false. It is not consistent with the statutes that empower CIA. Okay. It's also very clear and explicit in the 2010 PSYOPS manual, PSYWAR manual for the U.S. Army, signed off by the current Secretary of Defense, that there's a clause in there that specifically says that the U.S. Army PSYOPS and PSYWAR capabilities can be deployed against civilian populations in the event of a national emergency. And I've had multiple retired colonels from those divisions come up to me as I speak about PSYWAR and say that's exactly what has happened. They're furious about it because we've had technology developed for offshore combat deployed against our own citizens. So my assertion is that these organic, bottom-up type of emergent phenomena that you're observing are a partial explanation, but they're inconsistent with the data of globally harmonized purchase and manipulation of influencers, musicians, comedians that has occurred all across the Western world. And in particular in the Five Eyes nations, Canada, United States, Great Britain, New Zealand, and Australia, all harmonized, okay? We're dealing there, let me put it this way. I'm not aware, and please educate me if you are, of any organization in the world that has this level of reach that could manage that type of a harmonized propaganda and PSYWAR campaign other than the intelligence community with its Five Eyes extended alliances. And they absolutely are integrated into modern journalism and most of the major publications. And you can see that because you can watch the harmonized messaging that comes out globally from the major publications that is in many ways tied together by the BBC's Trusted News Initiative, which manages all of this. And underlying that is the perception that alternative media, which is what Brownstone is, let's call it what it is, okay? Brownstone is a home for a decentralized web of alternative media authors. And in Politico, I think recently it was referred to as Minutemen journalists, using a reference to the American Revolution. These pop-up guerrillas, really, is what they are. What we're talking about is guerrilla journalism, okay, coming up through alternative media, and it is perceived as a major threat against centralized corporate media and information control, and it must be destroyed. Okay, it cannot be allowed to persist because it is both a financial threat and it's a threat to control mechanisms operating through the control of all information that the public is exposed to, which is being controlled by the government and is occurring now. Mockingbird has gone big. It's got its own branches now. Scott Gottlieb created one, right? This whole new intelligence complex that he created through his lobbying, through Face the Nation and other organizations, right? That's what we're dealing with. This is not an organic, emergent phenomena because poor journalists are afraid that they're not going to be able to feed their families. This is centralized control. And it is global, and it is harmonized. And until we come to terms with the fact that we have, our Western governments are willing, capable, and actively deploying information control technology and strategies that have been accelerated beyond the wildest dreams of the Great Wurlitzer days and Operation Mockingbird circa the 1970s because of integration into social media. Until we come to terms with that, we are lost. We're continuing to peck away at the fringes.
Yep.
And so I wish that I would hear journalists speaking up about the integration of the intelligence community into journalism. And I wish I would hear academics speaking up about the integration of the intelligence community into academia. Both organizations have been completely compromised, as we've seen throughout this. But the thing is, I assert, it's by intent. It's not an accident. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Malone. I mean, it's incredible to think that it was 10 years ago when Ed Snowden came out with all the revelations about the NSA spying on Americans. Back in those days, he said a 250,000 Americans are being surveilled, by NSA, and everybody said, that's weird. And that was it, right? There was no real reforms. Nothing happened. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Emily Kaplan, and I am the co-founder of the Broken Science Initiative, and I also have a crisis management firm that's helped a lot of people who have been canceled through COVID and otherwise. And I just thought I used to be an investigative reporter. And so one of the things that's really interesting to me is there are some really interesting statistics about how and why the media has become so easy to manipulate. And I think we can't forget that in New York in the early days, there was such a panic, which is where most of the media in the United States is. And then there are also the really interesting things, like when I started out 20 years ago, the average age in the newsroom was like 47. Now it's like 27.
Yeah.
So there's no experience. There also used to be a culture where you would go in as a newspaper reporter, pitch a story, have a bunch of old men yell at you, tell you it was stupid, go back to your desk, find more information.
Right.
With cancel culture now, that's not allowed,
Yeah.
right? And then you add things to that, like when I was starting out in newspapers, I wrote one story a day, and I would have weeks to work on something longer. When I call newspapers today to ask for a correction with verifiable proof that they've gotten something wrong, I often find that the reporters were really reporting off of a release somebody sent them.
Right.
They're writing 6-7 stories a day. That's comparable to what I was doing a week. And it was hard to do that a week. So I think we have to have a little bit of grace. I think we're all angry, but I also think when I get on the phone with some of these people, they're young. And their intentions are actually good. They want to be challenging authority. They don't have time to do it. But when you talk them through how they got it wrong or other places that they should look, they're often far more open to it, and they might not help you with that story, but you'll start to notice that their next stories are a little more critical. No one's hanging out with cops. No one's going through court records. They just don't have time to do it.
Yeah.
And so I think to add to that, I started in newspapers. I've written for magazines, had columns, was a young producer at 2020 and Primetime and Good Morning America. I did a lot of stuff for. What was interesting to me to go to TV was that there was very little original reporting. We would sit around a table with the executive producers of the show, and every morning we would each be responsible for reading 5 to 6 newspapers. That's where all the content came from. So the sort of chain of custody, when you look at a local story and how it's getting used, the decimation of local newspapers, and local newspapers no longer being owned by families that were happy with a great profit margin by most considerations of other business examples. Now it's publicly traded, you have to get more every month. They've absolutely cut the newsroom. They're hiring kids they can pay nothing with no training. So we have to kind of remember these things. So Jeffrey, this conference is my 3rd year coming. I love coming. It's such a great group of people. So thank you for doing it.
Thank you, Emily.
One little other thing about the Rolling Stone piece that I've learned is that I had a client who's a big satire outlet, and they wanted to sue the New York Times for calling them, fake news. They couldn't, because for defamation you have to show damages. And it so drastically helped their circulation for the New York Times to call them fake news that there's actually a real opportunity when you have news outlets writing bad things about you. it's a great way to drive your own traffic because so many people are becoming wise.
Well, that time could come. I just didn't think it was there at the Rolling Stone thing. Plus, I wanted to try an experiment. I had a theory that nobody reads this crap, and I was right. So, yeah, it was fun. Emily, you came last year and the year before. 2 previous years, we started this program in the afternoon. Do you think we did a good job this morning?
I think it's been fantastic. What did everybody else think?
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're going to take a break for lunch. I'm sorry to have held you over, but this was so good. Thank you all so very much. We'll see you after lunch.